Okay, all right, perfect. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good night, depending on when you are watching this. And for those of you who are joining us live, thank you for the small technical kind of glitches that we got over. Anyway, my name's Shane. I'm excited to have all of you here with us this afternoon. And it's my privilege to get the chance to introduce to all of you one of our DMZ entrepreneurs in residence. Oh, apparently we are having audio issues. I think you may need to mute yourself, Roham. Anyway, I'm going to pass things over to Roham, one of our DMZ EIRs, to kickstart our session on Facebook marketing and mute myself. So hopefully the echo stops. But anyway, Roham, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for volunteering your time. And I pass things over to you.
Amazing. Thank you, Shane, and the rest of the crew. Really good to be able to have these technologies in place and have these sessions, so it keeps us out of isolation. So today, guys, just an FYI, side note is that there's no decks or presentations, and we're just going to go through it in person. If you have any questions, fire them off on the chat to Shane, and Shane and I will coordinate as we go through, because it's best, probably there's a lot of details as we go through this plan, and you'll probably have questions. It's better to address them as we go through the workshop instead of saving them for later, to make sure everybody goes with the flow of things. The idea here is, guys, obviously everyone is distributed now, and we're trying to find ways that you can do your business and kind of in a very digital way, whether it's on the lead generation or on the sales calls, and kind of moving people down the funnel. And Facebook is something that could potentially, depending on one or two core criteria, could really help you guys put yourself a little bit on a faster track than most people have been hit with the coronavirus these days. A little disclaimer and kind of good news is that a few people at companies at the DMZ, I've had the chance to walk through this framework with them, and we've had the chance to actually implement them across very different verticals. And firsthand, we've seen it work tremendously well. And kind of this is a generic and abstract framework, independent of your industry, independent on the type of product you have, whether it's a SaaS product or a marketplace, etc. The only core criteria for this I've found to be a common pattern that works in terms of like whether this framework works for your business or not is this, which is, are you able to identify your ideal audience on Facebook, right? Obviously, all of our users are on Facebook, right? But the question is, can we identify them? And today I'm going to walk you through this. You probably want to take notes, because I will talk about a lot of details that is worth remembering as kind of like a side point. But I'm just saying, if you want to pop up a notepad or something like that, it would be helpful. And if there's any questions, ask around. If you always guys want to have a follow-up conversation, we can do EIR sessions to get deeper and deeper. But let's get into it. This is all around Facebook marketing, and the idea is for you guys to be able to generate inbound leads based on some paid channels, and then hopefully transition them to some digital conversations like we're having here using Zoom and whatnot, and move them down your sales funnel. Let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is the definitions around three core structures in Facebook. And that's I found to be something that Facebook has done so generically and creates sometimes confusion, but most times it's actually around people using it so freely, these definitions, that in the long run it costs them a lot of confusion and complexity in their campaigns. And I'm going to go through them. These concepts are campaigns, which underneath them they have a group of ad sets, and underneath those ad sets you have ads. So imagine a tree structure where on top you have campaigns, which can contain one or many ad sets, and each ad set can have one or many ads. And each one of them, I'll go through the definition so you know when you need to create a new campaign and when you need to create a new ad set, etc. Because I've seen people misuse it that causes confusion down the line. Campaigns are where you define your successful goal in a Facebook campaign, meaning, and there's three that I kind of have always come across. Either you can generate traffic to your site and get them to convert on your website, so submit a form. These are the goals, right? That are defined at the campaign level. Number two, you can get people to submit a form on Facebook directly and they become a lead, and we'll go into that detail a little bit more. A third one, which we don't need to go into details, but just so you know as an example, is you can get leads through the chatbot on Facebook, right? So it's at the campaign level that you identify what is considered a successful goal for this campaign. Then you get the ad sets. And ad sets are where you define two very core important metrics. One is who is your audience, and you filter that out, and we'll go into details in a second. And two is what is your budget for that audience within that campaign, right? And then the third one is your ads, where you define your visual creative, your ad copy, and your call to action. Now, the third one is probably the most familiar to everybody, and we all use them the same way. But what is important is a lot of times I've noticed people misuse campaigns when they want to create a new audience. So they say, here's group A that I want to go after, and here's group B, and they actually create two different campaigns for them. And that, although it's a subtle difference in if you keep running Facebook campaigns over 6 months, 8 months, you will realize it creates a lot of confusion for you down the road to look back at your past performance and for you to have a real apples to apples comparison. So keep that in mind. And it's good to draw that tree structure because we keep coming back to them. Campaigns on top, which have children that are ad sets, which have ads. And now let's go a little bit deeper and deeper into this framework and how we're going to deploy it. Because one thing I want you to keep in mind, this framework was designed with this core thing in mind, where I've noticed we all, including myself, we all have our own biases. So we look at ads, we say this is great, this is terrible, etc. And the goal is we want to remove as much bias from this framework and instead be very data-driven in terms of how we deal with the campaign and how we define success versus failure. And I know most of the companies on this call, and in general, when you get started, your budgets are low. So the goal is how can we have a very systematic approach and only spend, minimum $5 a day and be able to get some results in a very quick and iterative way. And obviously, the framework is flexible enough that $5 is maybe the minimum, but you can very well spend a lot more per day. But the goal is for us to have a very data-driven and iterative framework where you can test with very low budgets. And if you think things are working, meaning you've found your target audience on Facebook well, and you're getting the right cost per conversions or cost per results, then you can amp up your budgets. Right? So let's go deeper and deeper into this framework. So what you want to do, here's a little bit of a little fact to keep in mind, and we'll see how that fact becomes useful. Number one is, when usually the session is interactive, I ask this question, but I can't ask this right now. But generally, there are many, many, many companies that run Facebook ads, as you all know. And interesting stats around it is that the best campaigns for a brand on Facebook roughly has about 100 different ad variations. And these are products or campaigns and initiatives that a company would run, but they have to go out over so many creative permutations until they find the winning factor. And ironically enough, on average, advertisers on Facebook On average, they have one creative. And I always highlight this because it shows you where we all have our biases, right? We think the ad we created is the end all be all, and we go live with it, and it has its own performance, and it could be a false positive or a false negative. But the goal is with this framework is to help you in a systemic way to get to those 100 creatives while iterating around your different audiences. And don't think that we're going to have to do all this work to know if this campaign or this strategy actually works for your brand or not. Instead, we incrementally iterate, and as we see progress, then we slowly increase the number of creatives and so on. Little disclaimer, there are times that you might run this campaign and after 3 weeks, you're like, this is not working. What that usually I've seen mean is that either you haven't found the right audience, that's key, or your audience is a group of people that, given the tools on Facebook, it's very difficult, maybe impossible to identify them, right? And we can just brainstorm a little bit about some of these ideas up front, but there's nothing better than the evidence and just putting it out there. So now let's go dive a little bit deeper into the campaign and building those campaigns out. Remember, we have the campaign, then we have ad sets, and then we have ads. So what we want to do on the campaign level, you want to identify what is a successful goal. The two that we're going to talk about, and I usually like to start with those, or you can pick one versus the other, is either sending people to a landing page and have them convert and become your lead. And conversions usually mean getting their name and email as a basic. Sometimes you also get the phone number. And it's the same thing on if you do a Facebook lead conversion. And the only difference is Facebook leads are where Facebook allows you to create a form on Facebook. You attach that form to your campaign, and then the user experience is such that as they're scrolling through their news feed, they see your ad, they click on it, they don't leave the Facebook platform, and they just literally are shown the form. And because Facebook knows their name and email and sometimes their phone number, if they have updated that info, it pre-fills those fields. And believe it or not, that alone, it really has a significant impact on your conversion rate, right? So you want to try these out. And although the latter sounds very exciting in terms of getting the lead on Facebook forms, because your conversion rates can be very high, and these are the numbers I've witnessed, is that Facebook leads can convert at up to 50%, sometimes 50+%. That's a lot. Of all the people who click on your ad, 50+% converting, and you have their names and emails. Whereas when you send people to the landing page, on a bad day, you hover around the 2% mark, 2 to 4%. In a decent day, it's 6 to 8% conversion, and on a really good optimized landing page and kind of audience and ad, the whole 9 yards, is around 10 to 12%, right? Just to give you context. However, I've also noticed that sometimes when leads convert on the landing page, have higher intent because they ended up reading more, understanding more about the brand on the landing page, and they're a bit more potent, so to say. So these are the two, I usually say, the starting points in terms of your conversion points that I think you should consider. And usually the campaign level is very straightforward. You just define your conversion and move forward with it. You can have other conversions, like let's say traffic to your site, etc. But I generally stay away from that, because when you're getting started, you want to be as close to getting a lead and knowing the cost per lead. And the goal is, guys, when you start out, these are the metrics. If you're under $20 per conversion, it's a decent start. If you can get your cost per conversion under $10, it's really good. But the goal is to get it under $5, because that's at this kind of climate and all the kind of numbers you read as a macro level is a really efficient and optimized cost per getting a full lead. Here's the best news. I have personally been involved with campaigns, and I've seen them be around $1 or even just a little bit under $1. And just imagine getting a lead information for $1. Whereas if you're on a platform like something Google, like Google AdWords, you might very well pay over $1 for every single click, let alone conversions, right? So these are some thresholds. I want to plant these kind of markers in your head so you know if the campaign is working, 6 to 8 weeks after we get started. Now, the second level under the campaign, if you remember, was the audience, or what they call ad sets, in which you define the audience and the budget. And here's something that's very important. Facebook allows you 3 ways for you to be able to define or kind of identify and reverse engineer your audience. They are their first approach, which when they kind of went live with their paid campaigns and whatnot, was around demographics. So I want males between 20 and 40 who live in Canada, right? That's like a demographic driven filtration of users. Then in the past few years, they came up with interest-based filtering. So you can say, I'm looking after people who live in North America, but their interests are apparels, like clothing, or they're really into tech gadgets, right? And that's where interest-based comes in, and there's a lot of filtrations. You have to play around with Facebook's filters to see kind of if they have the right interest that matches your business. And please never take a shortcut on that front. That's the most important part of getting these campaigns to work or not. And the third one is around profession. So you can say, I want to go after HR managers, or I want to go after people who are in finance, right? What I've found to be the most effective in Facebook is interest-based. So and I try to go that deep and try to, again, don't cut corners on this front, please, if you want these campaigns to work, and be as specific as you can.
And sorry, Roham, we have
Yes.
we have a question from the audience. And good reminder, if any of you do have any questions for Roham, please put it in the chat and we'll read them off, or feel free to save them to the end. The question is, what's the driver between $20 versus under $5 conversion costs?
When you say, what is the driver? Is that what, did I hear that right?
Yeah, what's the driver between $20 versus under $5 conversion costs?
So what it is that, again, the main thing is identifying and targeting the right audience, right? But the secondary components come into play better based on the conversion tool. So if you remember the campaign level, you're going to say, do I want a Facebook lead or do I want a landing page lead? I've seen gaps being significant in terms of that conversion. That's another thing. And eventually, as we go through this framework week after week, and the idea is to iterate on a weekly basis, is the creative that becomes the component. There's nothing else beyond it, but the most important thing is the audience. I hope I've answered that question. And then, so let's get back to the audience part. So as I said, the best filter I found is to be around interest, but you can do the interest-based and then maybe put some layers of demographic filtration. So you say, I only want to target people in North America, even though they have this interest, right? Just to filter down to the most targeted audience. Now, the idea, guys, is this. And as I go through the framework, in case this becomes a question, we will talk about how do you scale this. But for a starting point, I want you to identify an audience that is roughly around 200 to 250,000 people, right? And Facebook generally gives you that number. I've seen when you add filters, sometimes Facebook says, I can't give you the estimate of how big this is. And there's no rhyme or reason when they do it or not. But as you add filters, there's essentially when you're in the platform, there's a little number on the top right corner that keeps changing and says your target audience is 1 million people or then 500,000 people. So I urge you to narrow it down to roughly around 200 to 250,000 people. Now, this is assuming you have very little traffic to your site. You haven't run any Facebook ads before. For those of you who are a little bit more established as a business, you have a little bit of traffic, you have some clients, an even better way to build these audiences is based on your existing clients, subscriptions, and traffic, cold traffic to your website from Facebook, right? The way you do it, I won't go into the details right now, but you basically have to add the Facebook pixel to all of your pages on your site. And it's just, you always get one pixel. So don't think Facebook gives you multiple pixels. And then all you do is you use the feature built into Facebook called similar audiences. There's a magical machine learning algorithm behind the scene for similar audiences, and they do an incredible job. I honestly think that engine is what makes Facebook money, because when you give it a list of people, let's say customer-based emails or a bunch of traffic that you have gotten from Facebook, and you tell Facebook, go out and build a similar audience based on that base seed audience that I gave you, Facebook does an incredible job on finding similar people to them based on all the metrics they have, right? But here's the caveat. Your seeding group that you give to Facebook must be at least 1,000 people at the moment, which means if you have, hypothetically, you have 5,000 clients, emails and names, which is obviously probably not the case for a lot of DMZ companies because you're at a much earlier stage. But let's say you upload that list to Facebook, and Facebook tries to see how many of those emails it can match to profiles on Facebook. And depending on the match rate, if it's 20% or 50%, you have to get the match rate to be at least 1,000 for that seed base to be enough for Facebook to say, okay, now I can go give you a larger similar audience pool, right? So keep that in mind. That's a much better starting point, but a lot of you don't have that seed base. So that's why I said the next best thing is based on interest.
And sorry, before we continue, Rohan, we have a question from the audience. So they want to know, when you use lead generation ads on Facebook, can you customize Facebook lead forms? And the reason why they're asking that is because they're an ethical fashion brand with a compelling story to tell.
So yes, you can add your own fields, you can add your own copy. So there's some restrictions. I mean, you can't make it look like your farm, so there's no CSS changes, but yes, you can add fields. And the good news is their form connects to a lot of SaaS products that most of you are used to. For example, HubSpot or Zapier or etc. So they have hooks, and you can easily say, as soon as I get the lead, even Slack, push it to my HubSpot or push it to my Slack, whatever it is, right? So yes, you can customize it. Obviously, be careful about adding a lot of fields, because then the more fields you add, there are going to be fields that are not going to be pre-filled by Facebook, and therefore your conversion rates drop. So the answer is yes, but be careful about how you use them. Now, so we talked about campaign level, and it's all about target and what's your defined goal. We talked about ad sets, which is where you define your audience and how you should define it, and your budget. And budgets are just daily budgets. As I said, $5 a day will make sense, but you can increase that as we talk more about the framework and as the framework grows, right? And I'll share some numbers around how to think about it. Now we get to the creative side, right? And a lot of people think that's the most important thing. My personal opinion is the most important is the audience, which is set at the ad set level. The second most important is the conversion tool, which is set at the campaign level. And actually, the third most important thing is the subjective creative side, right? And your creative aspect has three components. And this is how ads are seen by users. And there's a lot of studies around it on Facebook. First, they see the image. Then they read the copy or the text on top. Then they read the call to action. So it's very important to stand out on the visual side. And if you guys remember, I said the best brands run 100 different variations for a campaign. So how the hell do we go from 0 to 100? Because it's very hard to be super creative if you have to come up with 100 variations around something, and it becomes very difficult. So the approach is going to be very systematic. And the way to think about it is this. There's always an 80-20 rule at play. So the 20-25 ads, I want you to think of them as completely blue sky thinking. Meaning, when you put your creative hat on, try to almost go in any and every direction to a point that if I were to look at 3 of your ads side by side, I would say, is this even the same company? Right? It's okay. And the way you can do it is you can use photography for ones, you can use illustration for another one, you can use bold colors with just text on them. These are the different, and I'm not a creative person, but these are ways you can think outside the box for that visual aspect of it. Then comes the copy. And here's a very common mistake I see across the board. And studying other people who see results, you see a common theme on how to make it work is that a lot of people make the copy very, what I call aspirational, right? Meaning it's usually a one sentence line that says something like, let's say I'm doing an ad for a car. It's something like the most comfortable cruising uh, in your town. It's like completely aspirational, right? And those ads usually do not do well. And instead, what you want to do, you actually want to make that copy pretty long. And I'll give you the rationale behind it. It's not just long for the sake of being long. It's long because you almost want that copy to be your mini sales copy. And it's a pre-qualifier for the person who's browsing their Facebook page to say, hey, does this really address what I need before they click the ad? Because it's when they click the ad that you get charged. And the way the copy works, it almost always starts with a question with an implicit yes answer. So if it was the car thing, it would be something like, are you looking to lease a new car this spring? Right? Because your lease is coming to an end, something like that, right? So it automatically separates, basically gets people to either opt in because, hey, they're looking for a lease renewal, or they're like, no, this is not for me. And that's actually good because if you're selling a new lease, you don't want random people clicking and costing you money, and you want them to kind of filter themselves out if they're not qualified. And then after the question, you follow a certain structure. I can't explain all of it, but if you guys email me separately, I'll send you guys a PDF that has this structure. That's totally fine. Like I can just forward it to you guys. Just mention Facebook kind of workshop so I remember what it's about. And essentially, what you want the copy to be, you don't also want to jam pack all your values for your business into the same copy. One thing you want to do, usually companies have 3 to 5 core values that they're after. Let's work with 3 for now. You want every copy to be solely around that single value, because one variable we're going to test out is, let's say you have 3 values for your company, core values that you offer your customers. You want to see which value resonates more with that single audience. Okay, so I just want to kind of recap is that you wanted the first 20, 25 ads to get to the 100 to be very blue sky thinking. And blue sky thinking is around the visual, is around the value proposition, how you word it. And how you get to the wording on it, you can touch upon 3 kind of marketing tactics. It could be around fear of missing out. It could be around gain, meaning what does the customer gain from this value proposition you're offering them? And the other one is logic, which is what is like, hey, you need a car. Logically, you need to get a new lease because your old lease is coming to an end, so that you have to get it, right? It's not a fear of missing out, but fear of missing out would be spring sales or special deals for spring are going to kind of finish up by April 15th for car leases. Don't miss out on them, right? It's a very different language, but it's all about a lease renewal for your car. So keep that in mind. You guys be the creatives. I'm not the creative, but try to think outside the box for the first 20 or so. And then what we do in order to fill in the remainder of the gap is, as we roll these different blue sky thinkings, we'll get 5 or so of them that really will stand out. And then what we do permutations and iterations on those, right? So that we've found the ones, the real visual that makes sense to people, the value proposition and kind of the angle we're going at that value proposition. And then we just permutate around it. Cool. Quick pause. Any questions, Shane? Okay, I'm assuming no. Moving forward. So we went through the 3 layers. Now, the question is, how do I roll this out, right? So we talked about the campaign, ad set, and then creative. But now the question is, how do I roll this out on a week-by-week basis? And then how do I rule things in or out every week? Like, not all these ads are always going to be running because they're, some of them are bound to fail. And the question is, how do we rule them out? So,
it looks like your thing got a question from the audience, Rohan. So you mentioned that having a long copy to be very specific about who your target customer is can save you money by reducing clicks from non-targeted members.
Correct. Very much.
I think they might want you maybe to expand on that a little bit more.
Expansion is essentially the copy being long is you want it to act as a qualifier of the lead so that the person automatically says, this is for me, or no, this doesn't make sense. Whereas where you put very short aspirational statements, a lot of people could think about cars in very different ways. Someone wants a new lease, someone is buying a new one, someone is wants to finance a new car, and someone is looking for a secondhand car, right? It becomes, you're just going to get a lot of random clicks who are not looking to get a new lease, for example.
And sorry, the follow-up question is, doesn't Facebook charge you per impression though? So does it matter how many people click on your ads when it comes to costs?
So deep down, there is a lot of layers of thinking. Partially, that is the right question. They say they charge you by impression, but behind the scenes, they are really looking at optimizing. You remember we said the audience is 200 to 250,000 people. They really look at how many of them click and which ones. How many of those submitted your conversion tool and which ones. And it keeps fine-tuning the algorithm behind the scene to say, with your $5, $10, $20 a day, which of those 250,000 people am I going to show the ad to? So I understand at the core, they say they charge by impression, but behind the scene, it makes a huge difference. And I've personally seen the range go from having aspirational copy to long copy for the same brand, for the same ad, same offering, to go from like 25% conversion to 50% conversion.
Okay, thanks.
Just to give you specific numbers.
Perfect. And so another question that we missed, so apologies. So this one is about similar audience. It's the same company with the ethical fashion brand. Would you need 1,000+ people as subscribers, or would you need more in order to match 1,000 people for the similar audience?
You always need more. So how much more depends on what is the overlap on Facebook's platform side. I've seen that range be very broad. I've seen it go from 20% match to 80% match, right? And usually if your email base is personal emails versus work emails, you have probably a higher likelihood of having a match. But the best way to do it, guys, it takes less than 10 minutes. Grab your list of emails as a CSV file, go to the audience base and just upload it to Facebook. And within 5 to 10 minutes, their algorithms runs and tells you either they found 1,271 matches, which is a specific number, or they say it's below, they give you some arbitrary term, which is called, you don't have enough matching people. They don't tell you how many, even if it's like 375. If it's under 1,000, they just give you this statement. So you can find out very quickly what your match rate is, if it fits the 1,000 or not, rather. Cool?
Yeah, no more questions so far.
Okay, cool. So let's get into the implementing this framework on a week-by-week basis, which is very important, right? So we have identified our kind of conversion, which was at the campaign level. We have identified our audience, which hopefully you haven't taken a corner on, and you've been very diligent about finding them. And then comes down, okay, how do I roll out the creative? And you've defined your budget, let's say $5 for the sake of argument per day. With $5 per day, you basically can run roughly, you can start off around 3 new ads per week, right? And what that means is every week we're going to add 3 new ads, but we might retire 0 to X number of the old ads. And that's a variable, and I'll explain how you rule things out. But it's a good habit to say, I'm going to submit 3 new creatives on a weekly basis. It doesn't take too much time. It doesn't take too much creative capacity, because if I ask for 15 new creatives, they become very similar to each other. And with $5, that's I've found to be a good ratio to that number of ads. But if you have a really strong team and you can pump a lot more creative, and you have, let's say, $30, almost in proportion, you have to increase your creative, because if you put $30 a day and only 3 creatives, you will burn too much of your dollars too quickly without it being necessary. Okay. So let's go with this number. You can adjust it based on your budget, but let's assume $5 a day, 3 creatives. Here's the part that I don't want you to fail on. And this is the part of the process that is very human driven. And unfortunately, the process falls apart when the humans don't follow the process, which is dedicate a day in the week, let's say Wednesday, and make every Wednesday that day of the week that you add new creatives and retire the ones that are necessary to be retired. And please stick to that timeline. And ideally, I want you guys, from a creative creation side of things, be a couple of weeks ahead, because things come up, we fall behind schedule, and I don't want the Wednesday to pass and for you to say, well, I'll do it Thursday this time, and then I'll do it Saturday the next week. The reason for that is I've seen digital performance across, whether it's Google, LinkedIn, doesn't matter what platform it is. It has digital behavior is very different across different days of the week. But funny enough, it tends to be very similar between Mondays of the 52 weeks in the year. So what you want to do, you want to compare apples to apples a little bit and let each creative run through an entire 7 days that are the same 7 days of the week. And that's the tightest I've been able to iterate, because if you do 2 days, you frankly could fall on the rough 2 days, or it could be your peak 2 days. And you start making subjective assessments, right? So make it on a weekly basis. Don't get paranoid. It's very exciting to keep refreshing the Facebook thing and see, oh, this ad is performing. And the goal is to remove your emotions from it and become more and more data driven. At the end of the day, guys, if you're spending $5 a day, you're going to lose $5 a day tops, right? So don't get paranoid if some things is not working. And at the beginning, you'll get weird numbers because the algorithm is trying to adjust who in the 250,000 I should show these ads to, right? So don't react to them throughout the week. Every week, we're going to add 3 new creatives, and we're going to retire a bunch. How are we going to decide what to retire? And the goal of this framework, guys, is for you to spend no more than 10 minutes every week on deciding what's in, what's out, right? Aside from the creative effort you have to put in, but in terms of the decision making. And I want you guys to not have to worry about who has bias towards this creative and I don't like it, but this person likes it. So what do? We want to be data driven. What you do, you go on the ads level, so the visual ads on your Facebook campaign, and you sort everything by impressions. And here's a rule of thumb. You want each ad to have roughly around 1,500 impressions before you can deem it as success or failure, right? So if it has only had, let's say the Wednesday of the week, next week comes, you sort by impressions and you have 8 ads in the running. And it's like week 4, hypothetically, right? If one of the ads only has had 400 impressions, don't rush to making a conclusion. But if it's like 14, 15, 1,700, then it's a good rule of thumb to say, okay, this ad has been given enough runway with my audience that I selected for me to see if it worked or not. And how we would define if it worked or not is you look at cost per conversion. And conversion, if you remember, is set at the beginning at the campaign level, where you say a lead submission. So let's say you sort all your ads and you get one ad, cost per conversion is $3.75. One ad is $8.12. And another ad is, I don't know, $12. And they've all had roughly around the 1,500 impression. You can very well decide to keep all of them. This is a little bit of a subjective layer, because you say, look, these are the only 3 ads that are working. I'm happy to pay even $12 per conversion. Or you might say, no, I'll kill the $12 one and I just pause it and I let the other 2 run, right? So, and the reason the 1,500 is, I've noticed around that 1,500 impression, it kind of is where the cost per conversion for that ad gets stabilized for that audience, right? So you can almost expect these numbers to stay the same, right? Obviously, you're going to monitor it weekly, and if they go whacked out, because sometimes they do get whacked out, you can pause it as well. But whether you retire or not is a little bit your subjective budgeting and thinking around it. I think a question has come up. Oh, it says, what type of image have you found to work best? Product photography, lifestyle photography, others? Here's the hard truth and the fun truth. It will surprise the hell out of you. Just try it out. I've seen things that everybody around the boardroom said, this is the perfect thing, and this one is too whacked out, and the reality worked in reverse. So try everything out. And that's why I've learned to remove my own subjective biases in these equations, right? So following up, so we went through every week, we're going to add 3 new creatives and retire a bunch based on that 1,500 impressions. And roughly with $5 a day, and your audience, remember, was around 200 to 250,000 people, I've noticed it takes a good 8 to 12 weeks to exhaust that audience. If you're spending more dollars, you'll exhaust it faster. And how do we know we've exhausted it? And what does that mean, right? That's the next step. And that's where your growth comes in. So the beautiful thing is, with even the first audience, and that's why it was so important to identify that first cohort as accurately as possible and not take any shortcuts. But if you see, you have rolled out, let's say, for the sake of argument, 6 weeks of running this, you have spent $5 a day, so $35 a week for 6 weeks. You can already see that the cost is very nominal, but you have been able to run 6 times 3 ads, so 18 ads have been rolled out. Maybe 5, 6 of them have reached that 1,500 impressions, maybe even more if you're lucky. And then all of a sudden, and some of them have been retired, you'll know what your cost per acquisition is, right? And the question is this something that I like? Is it the sub $5? To me, that's a very strong indication. If it's around the buck, I mean, you're super lucky, right? So then the question is, how can I scale this, right?
And before we get to that, Rohan,
Sure.
sorry, we just have another question on the budgeting specifically. So they'd like to know, is it $5 a day / ad set? In this case, do you set a daily budget or a lifetime budget of $35, considering the ad will run for $5 a day for 7 days?
So it's a good question. It's per ad set, because remember, the budget is set at the ad set. So that's why I'm assuming you guys, not you guys, but like, I'm assuming this is the starting point where people have very little budget. So that's why we decided to have 1 or 2 campaigns, which is 2 different conversions. And if, for every campaign you add, your budget has to increase. And then within each, you have the exact single ad set, which is the same group of 200 to 250,000. So you'll need $5 per ad set. And I recommend you do it based on a daily budget versus a fixed budget, because these iterations are always ongoing. And the moment you want to pause it, you just pause the whole thing. So you're not going to lose money. And you're not going to lose more than $5 a day, right? So there's a cap on a daily basis, but don't make it as a full budget for 7 days, because then you have to go and edit everything on a weekly basis and it becomes chaotic a little bit, right? So now comes, like, remember, let's say 6 weeks has run $5 a day. So your risk is very controlled and you know what you're going to invest in it before you even get started. But assuming this campaign works, you're going to have winning ads that are performing at a sub $5 per conversion by now. And the beautiful thing is, let's say, remember I said, let's say 18 ads are running. Over the time, Facebook, over these 6 weeks, Facebook's algorithms are actually very smart, and they are more in your favor, where they try, if a single ad is, let's say, giving you leads at $3.50, they are actually really good to put more and more traffic to that single ad. So you'll see a little bit of a lopsided impression size for the ads that are performing well versus the ones that are either not performing so well or they are added recently. Because if something was added on week 2 and it's performing well, the new ads on week 5 will not get that much love. And that's okay, because you want to exhaust the ads that work really well for that audience before we kind of distribute the love across the rest of them. And this is kind of where we go into exhausting an ad and scaling the campaign. What you want to do is this. When you go to the ads view on Facebook dashboard, and you have all these columns with different data, there's a little menu on the top right that says customize columns. And that's where you can even add more columns to your reports. And usually by default, that column is not in place. So you have to go and add it. It's called frequency. And I usually recommend when you add it, it puts it at the tail end of the report, but put it next to your cost per acquisition so that you see them side by side. And all that means, it gives you a number, a single digit, or it gives you like 2.1. It gives you 2.8, numbers like that, decimal numbers. And what that means, it means for that audience that you initially put in your ad set, so the 200 to 250,000 people, this ad on average has been seen 2.5 times by the people there, right? So that's what frequency means. And an ad, I consider it exhausted for that audience when it has reached close to 3 on the frequency front. And what that means, by the time it reaches 3 on the frequency for that 250,000 people, it means that ad has worked. That's why you kept it alive for so long. If it was costing you $30 per conversion, you would have retired it a long time ago. But that ad is one of your hero ads. And what you want to do then, now it's time to get to scale step 1. What you do, and by now you have created a lot of leads based on where you started. You have created a lot of clicks to your site from Facebook. So now you remember that seed audience I was talking about at the top of the conversation. You have built more seed, and maybe you're at a point to get to that 1,000 matching profiles on Facebook, and you can leverage that. But the goal is for you to define your second audience. So the first one was 250. The second one is around 1 million. That's how you are quadrupling your reach, right? And what you want to do, you want to create under the exact same campaigns, create a new ad set with this new audience, but make sure your 1 million excludes the original 250,000. That's very important. So you don't want to keep showing the same old ad to these guys.
And so I just want to do a quick time check, just because we're about 5 minutes away from 1 o'clock. I think if anyone has any last minute questions they want to ask, now would be the perfect time to do so, unless there's anything you really want to kind of end off with, Rohan, before we jump into.
No, questions would be good. I just literally, I have another minute. I'll cover that, and we could fully switch gears to questions. Is that you define this 1 million audience, and all you do, you grab the winning ads who got exhausted with 3 on the frequency from the 250,000 and start this audience with those ads. And you rinse and repeat that process with new creatives and iterating on the creative on the 1 million. When you exhaust certain ads with the 1 million audience, you go to a larger group with 3 to 5 million audience, and then grab the winning ads from here and roll them out into that audience. And that's the end of this for me.
Okay, perfect. So let's jump into some of the questions. So the first question, and before I do that, I think, Roham, if you wanted to send me the PDF, we can send it out to everybody who signed up for just to make life a little bit easier for me. Perfect. And so for everyone on the group. So the question is, say I'm a marketer reporting my ad performance to the executive team. What metrics would you expect the team to record to be satisfied with the report. So what metrics do you find executives need? Cost per conversion, lower than LTV, report the top 5 ads you run and their associated metrics. Like, what would you suggest?
So it's simplifying is key here, guys. And I think I've done this, and I usually like the report to be half a page for the executive, right? And essentially the way we do it is think of how many campaigns you're running. Usually, let's say in this case that I described 2 campaigns. One is around leads, and they're both around conversion, right? I would even sum them both together in the one row, but you don't want to talk about all the impressions, cost per impression, all that, too many layers on the top of the funnel. It's the goal. The goal was cost per conversion, right? We spent $300 this week and we got 25 conversions, and that's the cost per conversion. And what I usually like to do just to get everybody on board is kind of a sample of the top performing ads. This is a visual cue to the creative team to say, oh, I'm kind of getting ideas on what this audience is resonating with. That's basically it, to be honest. Keep it that simple.
All right, perfect. Any last question just before we wrap things up here to our audience?
And thank you guys for your time. I really appreciate everybody showing up. Hope it was helpful. I mean, it's hard for me to read anybody's faces, but I hope you found this useful. But we can, if you guys like, we can have sessions to go more and more in detail and kind of sit by the computer and look at your campaigns, etc.
Doesn't seem we have any questions to wrap things off. So I'll take this as an opportunity to reiterate. Thank you so much once again, Roham, for participating in this talk. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned to all of you out there, please wait. We will send the PDF that Roham talked about over to all of you. And if you don't get it, feel free to get in touch, whether it's like dmz@ryerson.ca or some other means, and we will get the PDF over to you. As Roham mentioned, he is available to meet with all DMZ companies for EIR office hours. So definitely feel free to take advantage of that. If you're not a part of the DMZ and are interested to find more about our programming and how to get access to times with all of our smart entrepreneurs and residents like Roham and others, we definitely encourage you to apply despite all of the craziness going on with COVID-19. We're still continuing to run things. We're still here to kind of help support all of you through this hump, and that's why we're doing workshops and presentations like this and many others. But with that said, Roham, thank you so much once again for this session. A lot of really great feedback. So I don't know if you can see the YouTube chat, but everyone's really thankful for your time once again.
I am, and
we are going to be recording this. So if anyone does want to refer back to this video at a later date, we will also be making this link available for everyone as well. But once again, Roham, thank you so much for joining. To everyone else who tuned in or who are tuning in the future, thank you. We're going to be doing more sessions like this over the course of the next few weeks. And Roham, thank you so much once again. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. And everyone,
thanks for the opportunity.
Stay safe, stay inside. Let's all help flatten the curve.
Cheers. Be well, guys.